So, the Cleveland Cavaliers have just become just the fourth team in NBA history to start a season 15-0, tied for the second best start to a season in NBA history behind only the 2016 Warriors and their 24-0 start. And we all know what happened that year. They have a chance to stand alone as the second best start to a season by beating the reigning Eastern Conference and NBA champions Boston Celtics on Tuesday night. A game where a Cavs win would certainly stamp their presence as a genuine NBA Finals contender. But, unfortunately, this is a Cleveland Browns channel. So instead of talking about all of that positive stuff, I have to, once again, talk about the Cleveland Browns losing another football game. The joy. Hey guys, it's Oliver here, aka UK Browns NFL, and this is my review of the Cleveland Browns' embarrassing 35-14 loss against the New Orleans Saints. The Cleveland Browns just lost the game by 3 scores to a team that was 3-7 and sacked their head coach 2 weeks ago. A game in which Jameis Winston completed 30 for 46 of his passes for 395 yards, 2 touchdowns and 0 picks. A game in which the Browns defense forced 2 turnovers and held Alvin Kamara to, I believe, 89 total yards. And yet they were still blown out by 21 points. If it wasn't already obvious enough, this is a bad football team. Plain and simple. Just a pathetic performance, really, coming off of the bye week, if we're going to be honest. This team quit on Sunday, plain and simple. I've defended this regime and for a while, and whilst I still haven't jumped off the ship completely, it has got to a point where I can't even argue against the possibility of this coaching staff and regime just being cleaned out. I mean, hell, it might even be possible that Kevin loses his job if the Browns lose on Thursday Night Football this week. I really don't think anything is off the table at this point. And that's just a result of what is, in my opinion, the most disappointing Brown season since reactivation. Quite possibly the only season in that time period where the team and, the fan base as well, and everyone involved around the organisation went into the season with genuine Super Bowl aspirations. And they're 2-8. So, if you had told me before the season that we would be 2-8 headed into week 12, I genuinely would not have believed you. All the pre-existing damage and emotional trauma this team has caused this fan base in the last 25 years especially, and I still would not have believed they would be in this position. I really wouldn't have. As a fan, it leaves you angry and upset, and as someone who is trying to cover this team from a somewhat non-biased perspective as best as I can, it does leave me truly bemused. This roster was on paper arguably one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. It wasn't just me saying that, it wasn't just Browns fans saying that. You look at a lot of the kind of predictions and stuff going into this season, a lot of respectable people agreed with that sentiment. They were coming off of a season in which they went 11-5 and made the playoffs despite starting 5 different quarterbacks and, having 26% of their salary cap on IR. And through 11 weeks of the season, they've played as a bottom 3 team in the NFL. It just goes to show how much more, goes into being a competitive team and having a winning culture than just having good players on paper. I think this season has truly been the biggest detriment to this coaching staff and the front office's time, with the Browns, and with the Deshaun Watson situation, looming above them as well. It's led to a strong possibility that a head coach who is a 2-time Coach of the Year winner and led a franchise to more 11-win seasons in 4 seasons than that same franchise had achieved in the previous 30 seasons, could end up losing his job. It's just an absolute disaster of a season. There's no sugarcoating it. But perhaps, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. We've known that this is a bad football team, since before this game. This is the same football team that failed to score 20 points in 8 of their previous 9 games. This is the same football team that went 26 consecutive third downs without a conversion, an NFL record. This is a bad football team, and it's just frustrating to constantly be reminded every week, especially during a season in which, we had more expectations for this franchise than we've had in the last 30 years. And, it is a massive shame. It's a massive disappointment, and, there's not really much more you can say. Okay, so time for the painful part. I kind of wish that I didn't structure my reviews with a game recap in them, but I did, so I'm going to stick to it. So with that being said, here is a quick recap of this awful loss. So the Saints won the coin toss, elected to defer, so the Browns offense ran the opening drive in this game. Nick Chubb took the first 2 carries of the game for a first down. The Browns then went for it on 4th down at the midfield, and failed to convert after a pretty bad play design, to be honest. Alvin Kamara's first carry for the Saints went for 13 yards, and at this point I'm immediately thinking about what I said in the preview in regards to stopping Alvin Kamara. Taysom Hill then threw for a first down, and then ran for a touchdown to capitalise on the good field position they had after the Browns failed 4th down. So, first opening drive score the Browns defense has given up all season, and, kind of unfair to them. The offense obviously gave up the short field position by the failed 4th down, but so that was the first opening drive score that they have given up this season, either touchdown or field goal. But obviously down a touchdown pretty early in this game. Browns were unable to respond, punted the ball away. The Saints then picked up a few first downs, including Derek Carr picking up 8 yards with his legs on 3rd down, which at that point you just think, oh, is this how this game is going to go? The Saints then went for it on their own 4th and 1, and actually got the completion on a broken play, but a holding call negated the play, put them out of field goal position, and they had to punt the ball. Browns then responded with an 89-yard touchdown on the ensuing play, arguably their best offensive play of the season. Jameis Winston was able to negate pressure, roll out of the pocket, and then find Jerry Jeudy on an in-breaking route who, just beats his man one-on-one and wins the foot race for what was the 4th longest passing touchdown in Cleveland Browns history, and the longest passing touchdown of Jameis Winston's career. So a good response from them at this point. The Saints were then called for a penalty on the PAT, and so obviously, as you always should, the Browns go for it on the 2-point conversion. They did fail. Obviously, I wasn't the biggest fan of the play call, but like I said, I 100% agree with going for 2 every single time that you get a penalty. And you're half the distance to the goal. It just makes sense to go for the 2-point in that situation. I think every single coach would, even the conservative ones. But obviously they didn't pick up the 2-point conversion, so this game was at 7-6. Denzel Ward then picked off Taysom Hill for the Browns' 2nd interception of the season, which is pretty crazy to think about. Only 2 interceptions in 10 games now. And this was immediately after he had just gone into the medical tent, and some people on Twitter, as they always do, were calling for him to retire. And then immediately afterwards he gets an interception, so pretty fitting. And at this point it felt like the Browns had withstood a pretty bad start and had swung the momentum in their favour. But obviously, as we all know, that did not prove to be the case. Kadarius Toney then gets his first touch for the Browns. It does result in an 8-yard loss, truly encapsulating the Kadarius Toney experience. And then the Browns punt to start the 2nd quarter, and then immediately give up a 71-yard catch and run touchdown to MVS Marquez Vantez Stantlin. I tweeted during the game that the defense must have felt bad for Joe Woods, so just gave him one back. It was just a really poor, touchdown to give up from the defense, and personally, it really amplified the Browns' need for linebackers this offseason, with that room being pretty thin. The coverage from the guys that were out there was pretty bad on that play, and it did show. DTR then came in on the Browns' next offensive drive for a DTR package, and it resulted in 0 yards. But the Browns were able to string together a pretty decent drive after that, with Jameis making some pretty nice throws to Elijah Moore and Jerry Jeudy, as well as a really great diving catch from Jordan Akins to keep the chains moving after they, a penalty had put them behind the sticks. But the Browns were forced into another third down, and Winston was sacked after holding onto the ball for too long, which forced them into a 51-yard field goal, which Dustin Hopkins misses, the first of his consecutive misses in this game. I mean, at this point, 51 yards, it's disappointing. He made all of his 50-yard kicks last year, but I think because of that, people do kind of think that a 50-yard is now a chip shot. It is still a 50-yard, so you're thinking maybe, give him the slightest benefit of the doubt. But obviously, as we all know, that was quickly eroded, and more on that later. But the Saints then on the next drive drove down the field, but the Browns defense forced another turnover just after the 2-minute warning, as Denzel Ward stripped the ball from Taysom Hill and recovered the ball at the Browns 7-yard line. So he not only intercepted a Taysom Hill pass, he also forced a fumble on Taysom Hill and recovered the ball himself. Massive play at this point in the game, and it kept the Browns within a one-score game. So it really was a big play, massive play from Denzel. Winston then on the Browns' next drive had a really great 23-yard completion to Jerry Jeudy on third down to really give them some breathing room, obviously after starting the drive at their own 7. So even at that point, if you're unable to go down and do anything with it, at least you've given Corey a lot more room to punt that ball downfield and not give them any time to go and score again if it did come to it. Then really unfortunately, DeJuan Jones on the next play obviously suffered a season-ending injury, gets his ankle rolled up on by Wyatt Teller. The car immediately comes out. It appeared as if he had broken his ankle. You could see him saying to the trainers and stuff, you could pretty clearly make out what he was saying, and that he thought it was broken. And this has since been confirmed, that he did break his ankle. It will require surgery and he will be out for the season. Really disappointing. My thoughts are with DeJuan Jones. Of course, you don't want to see any player suffer an injury. It's really disappointing given the positive steps he had taken in replacing Jed Wills as the starting left tackle. So Jed, unfortunately, I think for a lot of Browns fans, Jed Wills will obviously have to come back in now. So we'll see obviously how that goes for the rest of the season. But again, just really disappointing, and hopefully DeJuan Jones can come back next year, healthy and continue the positive steps that he was taking, towards being this team's, long-term starting left tackle going forward. But despite the injury, the Browns did actually put together a pretty good drive to end the half, with Njoku playing a pretty big part in that, but they were unable to capitalise with a touchdown. So they settled for a 32-yard field goal, which Hopkins missed again. But the Browns caught a massive break after the Saints were called for a hold to wipe off the miss. But in what felt like some kind of sick joke, Hopkins then misses his third consecutive field goal. Obviously, technically, second missed field goal of the game because the second one was negated. But, 3 missed field goals are 3 missed field goals, especially when you miss 2 from under 32 yards, and as bad as he did. This one was from 27 yards. He just completely lost his cool. Every kick, all 3 of the kicks were just hooked way wide left. So just a pretty crazy turn of events, a crazy through sequences, and if anything, probably, got rid of any faith that Browns fans had left in Hopkins. He's had a pretty bad year already this year. So this kind of just was the cherry on top of that, and ended what was a positive drive in a negative way headed into the half, which was obviously disappointing to see. Coming out of the half, the Browns defense did get a stop on the Saints' opening drive. Cedric Tillman then kept the Browns' next offensive drive alive with his first catch of the day to get a first down, and give the Browns some breathing room again after they were starting the drive on the 10-yard line. Nick Chubb then had back-to-back first downs, including a 14-yard carry, his longest of the day. Really felt like he was getting his legs back under him at this point, which was really great to see. And this drive was capped off with Winston throwing an absolute dart to Elijah Moore in the back of the end zone for a 30-yard touchdown. It was a great throw from Jameis, and Elijah Moore did a fantastic job to bring that ball in as well as keep his feet in bounds. So really, really good touchdown to kind of cap off a pretty decent drive, one of the Browns' best drives of the year, if we're being honest. And the Browns were then able to actually convert this 2-point conversion with a pass to Njoku, and with everything that was going wrong in this game, they managed to tie it at 14. 14-14. At this point, you're thinking, okay, maybe they've managed to get the momentum back in their favour. But again, as we all know, that's not what happened. The Browns defense were then able to force another punt after doing a pretty good job stopping Kamara behind the line of scrimmage on back-to-back plays. But the Browns were unable to capitalise on it, punted the ball back. And then Obo had a strip sack, which really could have changed the outcome of this game, given the time it was at. But the Saints were able to recover it. They ended up keeping the chains moving after a couple of bad sequences from the defense. Denzel then had a massive pass breakup to prevent a touchdown, so just continuing his really good day. But unfortunately, the Browns, they managed to force the Saints into 4th and short, but they gave up a 33-yard touchdown run to Taysom Hill out of the Wildcat. Delpit misses his tackle, and Hill just had a clear lane to the end zone. Terrible stuff. 21-14 Saints now. Jamari Thrash on the Browns' next drive had his first NFL reception, which went for a first down. Winston was then nearly picked off. Wasn't really his fault. Njoku bobbled the ball pretty badly. However, he was able to somewhat make up for it with an 8-yard gain straight afterwards to make it 3rd and short, and then an 18-yard gain after that to move the chains. But once again, the Browns were unable to convert. Winston was sacked on 3rd and long, and they were forced to punt the ball again. And I'm not one to moan about the refs, but it was a clear face mask penalty, which should have been called. And if it was called, it negates the Saints' touchdown drive that they had on the next drive, and keeps it a 1-score game. But hey ho, that's the life of the NFL. I'm not one to usually moan about refs decisions, so I'll leave it at that. But the Saints obviously then returned the Browns punt for a touchdown, but it was ruled out of bounds at the 35-yard line instead. But they did ultimately take advantage of the field position, which resulted in a 1-yard touchdown throw to Jawan Johnson, the tight end. The Browns then drove down to the Saints' 22-yard line, but ended up turning the ball over on downs. And then the Browns defense just kind of capped off their terrible day by giving up just an embarrassing 75-yard touchdown run to Taysom Hill. Once again, out of the Wildcat, like they didn't know what was coming. And then the Browns' final drive of the game resulted in a punt. That's right, a punt. I know the game is lost, but they didn't even try to get a garbage time touchdown and make the score a bit more modest. But they punted the ball away, and I mean, can you really blame people for saying that this team quit after that? I don't think so. And the Saints obviously were then able to just kneel the clock out and secure their 4th win of the season against a Brown team that's, to be honest, just even worse than they are. So this is usually the part where I compare the Browns' performances to, my 3 keys to victory, and kind of dissect where things went wrong or right, rarely, usually wrong. But it was kind of crazy. The Browns actually achieved all 3 of my keys to victory this week, and still lost by 3 scores. It is entirely possible that my evaluation of this game was just completely off. I certainly don't claim to be the smartest person in any room when it comes to the NFL, but to get blown out in a game where your offense had the most yards that they've had all season, where your defense forced 2 turnovers and held the opposition's most productive player to 87 total yards and 0 touchdowns, I think it's safe to say that this team is broken. I said the Browns offense would have to play like an actual NFL offense this week, and 443 yards on 6.3 yards per play sounds like an NFL offense to me. The problem was they couldn't capitalize on their scoring opportunities, and they couldn't keep the chains moving enough on 3rd down. 14 points in 70 offensive plays and only 3 for 13 on 3rd downs. that lack of production on money downs meant that, this offense just wasn't able to overcome the other deficiencies that this team had, especially with the defense and the special teams. I mean, heading into this game, Alvin Kamara led the Saints in both rushing and receiving yards, with actually over 500 rushing yards more than the team's second leading rusher. And, I said the Browns defense had to put an emphasis on limiting Kamara in this game. And after a somewhat sketchy start, they did just that. They held Alvin Kamara to 87 yards and 0 touchdowns on 20 touches. But they decided to let Taysom Hill have 188 total yards and 3 touchdowns on just 15 touches. One thing I did not bank on was this defense making 34-year-old Taysom Hill look like prime Adrian Peterson. Taysom Hill had 27 carries for 130 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on the season entering this game. And he had 138 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on 7 carries against the Browns. 230 total yards on 37 touches entering this game. 188 total yards on 15 touches against the Browns. 34-year-old Taysom Hill. Just inexcusable, man. I mean, you give up a 30-yard rushing touchdown on 4th and 1 with Taysom Hill in the Wildcat. I mean, my cat could have told you that was coming. And they still couldn't stop it. And I don't even have a cat. All of this on top of a persistent tackling issues and just another big play given up in the MVS 70+ yard touchdown. And to be honest, it was just an embarrassment. I've defended this defense multiple times, but I think they quit on this team yesterday. Along with pretty much the rest of the team as well. Denzel Ward is the only player on this defense that looked like he was playing to actually try and win this game. I do think that Denzel Ward is massively disrespected by a lot of people, even in this fan base, and it honestly makes me angry. I believe he's a top 5 corner in this league, and we are lucky to have him. He forced 2 turnovers by himself in this game and did everything that he could to give his team a chance. And, speaking of turnovers, the Browns had 2 in this game. Nearly half the amount that they've had in the previous 9 games. My final key to victory for this game was to force turnovers. They got 2, they gave up none, and they still lost this game. And, as I have mentioned multiple times this season, this special teams is a problem. I do think that Bubba Ventrone should be on the hot seat. The punt and kickoff coverages have just been awful. There's constantly massive gaps in the coverages, which is just making it too easy for teams to get decent return yards against us. Dustin Hopkins, as I mentioned, is broken. He missed 3 kicks in this game. I know technically 2, but I'm counting it as 3. He clearly has the yips, and to make things, worse, they extended him in the off season. Now I'm not gonna, blast them for it. I mean, Hopkins was absolutely brilliant last year. I think 90% of fans, shared the news about the extension in a positive light. Even I did, but in the end of the day, it doesn't change my kind of personal belief of giving kickers long-term contracts anyway. I just think unless you have Justin Tucker, obviously, well, pre the last couple of years, Justin Tucker, I just don't really see the value in doing it. One positive I will say about the special teams, Corey Bojorquez, has been the only bright spot on that side of the ball. So shout out to Corey. I could watch him pump bombs all day, to be honest. It's quite a sight to behold. You could argue that the Browns' offense was the best side of the ball in this game, despite being a detriment to this team for most of the season. And I think that just kind of shows how this team is unable to play complementary football. The only game that they have managed to do so, they beat the Ravens. Just crazy. As I said, my evaluation for this game could have been way off. But if I had told you before the game that the Browns offense would put up the most yards that they've had all season, they'd limit Alvin Kamara to 87 total yards and 0 touchdowns, and were +2 in the turnover margin, I highly doubt that many people would have thought they'd lose this game, especially by 21 points. But they did. As I said, this team is broken, and to be honest, they have a lot of soul searching to do. A season in which the Browns entered with the most expectations that they've had since reactivation, and they're 2-8. It's the most disappointing season in my entire fandom. As I mentioned, I'd love to hear from some of the older fans where it ranks for them. But it's just a complete disappointment. And as I've said multiple times, it's not like any of us are surprised. We've known this is a bad team since week 3, and as I said earlier in the video, I don't think anything is off the table in regards to the job security of this coaching staff and regime. And as I said, whilst I personally believe that firing Stefanski doesn't really achieve anything, it has reached a point where even I, someone who has defended this head coach for a long time, can't even argue against, anyone calling for his job, or even the front office's job. This team has lost to the 2-8 Giants, the 2-8 Raiders, the 3-7 Saints, and the 3-6 Cowboys, and 2 of those games were blowouts. And there's just no sugarcoating it. This is a bottom 3 team in the NFL. So load up the mock draft simulators, boys and girls, because this team will have a top 5 pick in the 2025 draft. And I never like to end these videos on a negative, so I am going to try my hardest to try and find something positive to say. I thought Jameis Winston's pre-game speech was pretty cool, I guess. No, but all seriousness, I was pleased with Tillman's progression. I do look forward to seeing what he can do moving forward. I think Judy, had his breakout game in this game from a statistical standpoint, which is obviously great to see. I mean, he will likely be our wide receiver 1 next year, and 560 yards in 10 games with awful quarterback play, I don't think is anything to scoff at. So positive stuff. Nick Chubb also looked the closest to his former self since coming back from his injury. Only 11 carries for 50 yards, but there was multiple first down runs in there, as well as just Nick Chubb getting the extra yards out of nothing, as we've come to know with Nick Chubb. And due to the score, the Browns obviously had to abandon the run in this game, but it was great to see Nick Chubb looking somewhat of his former self. And finally, as I mentioned, Denzel Ward was fantastic again in this game. Interception, forced fumble recovery, as well as a touchdown saving pass breakup. He's been fantastic all year and deserves the recognition, but unfortunately, I just don't think he's going to get it, just given with how bad this team is. And I've said 100 times, this season sucks. I've run out of adjectives to describe how bad it's been, but we're Browns fans. We've been tested before and will certainly be tested again. All we can really do is stick together and make the most out of a bad situation. And let's just be thankful for the Cleveland Cavaliers, I suppose. But that would do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free and it really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can connect and interact with me on social media. I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and as I always say, even if I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy, because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have a great week, and most importantly, go Browns.